Good morning, everyone. It's just 7 o'clock here at the Hermitage, and looks like it's going to be a beautiful day here. Clear, cool, sunny, high of 70. So leaves are starting to turn and fall off the trees. A hint of fall in the air. It's quite refreshing. So let's just begin with a few minutes of quiet. Allow the mind to collect and compose and settle for just a minute or two. Okay, so yeah, to borrow a phrase from Luang Daily Reflections at Abhayagiri, beginning our day. Still letting the cobwebs clear out of my head a little bit from the morning, and had some tea, so they're on their way. Just a few thoughts this morning about the realm of communication. It's coming up in my mind as a possible topic to offer a couple comments on, because it's such an area that can cause us great suffering when we don't do it very well, and it can lead to some really wonderful things when we do it well. It's one of the three doors of expression of body, speech, and mind. Speech, and it's one that we all spend a lot of time doing, and it's so easy to get caught in thoughts or moods or emotions that then tumble out in the form of speech. I think many of us have gotten a bit better with our bodily actions. It's a little more easy to restrain oneself or to control oneself, do skillful things in body, because the body is just so much more tangible and noticeable. But the responses and the ways that we communicate in speech are a little more subtle and kind of hardwired in some cases. I remember a good friend and former monk, Nattiko, who's a Swedish man, layman now. But anyway, I remember I was spending some time with him at Chithurst, and he often referred to the ketchup bottle approach to speaking, where sometimes you just don't think quickly enough to catch yourself, and it's like hitting the bottom of when there used to be actual glass ketchup bottles. You hit the bottom of it to get the ketchup to come out, and it would just splurt all over the plate or wherever the table. It's sort of the ketchup bottle model of speech that we sometimes find ourselves in, just splurting out all over the place. So anyway, it's a place to really put some time and effort, and it's like in a monastery. It's something that's crucial because we are much more restrained in our bodily actions with our precepts, but things still tend to come out in speech patterns. So it's really worthy of spending time considering how to be skillful. And in my mind, one of the most useful things is actually kind of its paired partner. Really learning how to listen is so important, because much of the time we're not really fully there and listening. We're so wrapped up in our thoughts and our ideas and what we want to say that we forget in some kind of interaction or some group setting. We forget to just sit back and drop our own agendas and to listen. So I often think in terms of good communication that that's actually the most important part uh, of the process, is how to learn to listen well. We notice that in our morning chanting, when we're chanting as a group together, that if we want to have a nice chanting session where everybody's in tune and then everybody's in harmony um, and with each other during the chanting, actually the most important aspect of that is actually listening to the leader and listening to those around us. And that'll help us stay on tune and in sync with people much more than trying to do it the right way according to our standards or our preferences of the chanting. So listening right there is a real good example of how one can harmonize nicely with the group. But just in terms of speech and in conversations, we can just think about how nice it feels when we're in conversation with somebody, and if you're expressing something, particularly if it's something of a personal nature or something that's hard to say, um, having trouble expressing yourself or feeling tentative, how wonderful it is when you're in the presence of somebody who's actually really listening, and you can tell by their their bodily posture or their attentiveness, the way that they're holding the space and paying attention to you while you're speaking, and just how welcoming that feels and how much it makes you feel more safe to be able to say what it is that you want to say, particularly again if it's of a personal nature. And how often that doesn't happen, whether I see it in myself all the time, and get busy with a task or get involved with something, and somebody knocks on the door of the office, wants to talk about something, and you're kind of half there and you're half not, half paying attention, doing some multitasking, and it's so easy to kind of not pay full attention to somebody. And so it's the world these days is so busy, and there's so many things that people have to do and so many responsibilities that it's understandable how that happens. But when it's possible to actually just stop what you're doing, turn around and give someone your full attention, what a gift that is, and how it feels kind of nice inside too, even though there's something you feel like you'd like to be working on, just to take that moment and pause and oh, what's really most important here? Is it most important to get this task done, or is it more important to just establish a nice, easy communication with somebody just by turning around and giving them your full attention and fully listening, rather than that kind of I have also experienced both on the receiving and on the giving end of the hand on the doorknob kind of thing. Somebody's talking and maybe they're talking a little bit too long or having trouble saying what they're saying, and your hand's on the doorknob and you're just waiting for them to end so that you can get out the door. And just to notice how that gives up gives a air of agitation for ourselves and for the other person too, and to kind of just watch that and take those opportunities to attend fully. The Buddha uses a really nice phrase when he applies listening to Dhamma, that the listener should attend with eager ears, so that you're not just kind of drifting off into some thought train and completely missing the whole Dhamma talk or Dhamma reflection, but you're actually paying attention to what's being said and incorporating it into your understanding and your practice right as it's being given. And we can do the same thing with each other, I think, in conversation. So listening to each other with eager ears, wanting to understand, wanting to give somebody that full space of attention. And sometimes that's all that's needed for somebody to work through an issue or to express a grievance or whatever, is just to be heard. How many times do we think, well, I just want to be heard? You don't have to come up with a very wise, pithy, skillful answer, but sometimes just that sense of listening and being heard solves many problems. So that to me is the most important thing, and that's where I find that if I can remember to do that, I feel so much better at the end of a conversation, rather than immediately acting on any reactions I'm having, or having to come up with an answer to a problem without fully hearing the problem. Just to give it that space and time, and then a whole lot can happen in that space. And then when it comes time, the Buddha didn't suggest that we should be silent all the time. In fact, he didn't allow that as part of the practice. People weren't allowed, monks and nuns weren't allowed to actually take vows of silence for long periods of time. Although he certainly praised being circumspect with our speech and being careful and not speaking when we don't need to, but he always spoke in praise of skillful speech as well, so that when the time is appropriate and when the message is useful and important, particularly if it has a relationship to Dhamma practice, but other times when we need to just communicate with each other, then he gives, of course, as many of you know, a number of guidelines as to choosing how to do that and what kind of state of mind we want to be in when we're speaking, particularly if it's giving feedback to somebody or talking about something that maybe hasn't gone right, if it's a difficult conversation especially, but they really apply in any kind of situation, I think. And those guidelines start with, of course, the right speech in terms of truthfulness, wanting to be truthful and not hiding anything that should be expressed, but also being judicious in how we do it and in how we share it. And sometimes the truth, if it's not done with a lot of care, can be pretty blunt, and we want to avoid that kind of situation, or it can be actually a truth that we think is a truth, but it's actually our judgment of what is correct. And so actually the way the Buddha phrases it is to speak factually in line with the facts, rather than say in line with our opinions or our judgments. And that's a bit tricky, but you see that the Buddha was the forerunner of nonviolent communication, I think, that technique that's come out recently. But one of the things that's paramount in nonviolent communication is just stating a fact. So like quoting what somebody said, referring to, like, when you said such and such, and then to paraphrase it as most accurately as you can, so that it's a factual statement, not just a judgment or an evaluation that you're telling somebody about. So speaking to the facts, and then speaking in a kindly way, using gentle words, not speaking harshly. So ways that learning some vocabulary that doesn't turn people off or doesn't refer back to some assumption of what their intention was, but just speaking to the facts and speaking gently and referring to your own reaction, if there was some reaction, and owning that as your own, whether or not the person intended it or not. We don't know what other people are thinking when they say things, so we have to be careful about our assumptions. And checking that out, and then knowing the right time to do it too. It's to have a conversation, and we kind of have a rule of thumb at Abhayagiri that we don't do any kind of serious conversation or sharing like that on the day after the all-night sitting. because people's minds just aren't usually prepared for dealing with that when there's not been much sleep, or before the meal when people are hungry and maybe a little bit irritated or irritable. So choosing the right time, if it's something that's a little bit sensitive, maybe not with other people around. So finding a time when there's quiet, one-on-one time available, and asking permission is a real skillful part of the process, I think, that sometimes it's easy to forget because you might be so anxious to talk with somebody or to share something that you forget to just ask them, say, hey, do I have permission to maybe just talk with you about something that's on my mind? I have a concern and I'd like to talk with you about a bit sensitive issue. And then give them the opportunity to say, okay, yeah, that'd be fine. Or to say, well, this isn't a great time. I've got a lot of things on my mind. Can we do it another time? So giving the person the option to participate. If you've got their permission, then they're going to be much more receptive to a conversation. So, and then also reflecting on the usefulness of what you're going to say, because sometimes there's something that's true and factual, and you think you've chosen the right time. But if there's a strong chance or a possibility that you think that the person isn't going to be able to use it, isn't going to be able to hear it, and that it may just be something that's, even though it's true, it may just be agitating and not helpful, then that's not the time to do it. You want to be sure that there's at least a possibility that it's going to be useful or beneficial. You may not know completely ahead of time if that's going to be the case, but there's at least some semblance that this might be heard if it's done correctly and might be useful for somebody. So and then to do it with a heart of loving kindness, which maybe is one of the most important things. And that's not always the most easy thing to generate in a time, but in a time of difficulty. But taking that opportunity before speaking, before engaging with somebody, before going up to somebody and asking permission, to just sort of establish that intention of well-being, well-wishing for oneself and others, and to hope that that the skillfulness and the space that comes with the communication is enough to sort of fulfill that intention of well-being without getting lost in emotion. So those are just some thoughts of how to communicate effectively when the time does come to communicate with somebody. And these are things that just take as far as I'm concerned, a lifetime. These are skills to develop as part of our Dhamma practice, because when we can do that, at the end of the day, we're just so much easier. It's so much easier to put stuff down and to just enjoy the fruits of skillful communication, skillful relations with each other. But again, going back to what I think again is the most important thing is that very attentive, sensitive listening, trying to hear what somebody else is saying, checking with them, paraphrasing as needed, and showing somebody that you're actually really paying attention and really want to understand. That wish to understand and communicate clearly. If that's communicated, then things go a whole lot easier, even if some unskillful things are said. If people feel a sense of trust and caring and space, then it'll help the process all that much more, and great basis for community relationships or people you work with, family, the whole gamut. So I think I'll just leave that for this morning's brief reflection and see if there's some questions that maybe came up. Let's see. Down at the bottom. Okay. Good question. When you find yourself, I'll insert the word already, engaged in a futile argument, and you want to disengage and separate your kamma from that person, how can you gracefully get out of the interaction? So that's a question about how to catch yourself mid-flow when something's going going ballistic or going wonky, how to gracefully disengage. And that's just a matter of skill. I think the first thing you need to do when you recognize that it's happening, at least as I reflect on it, is to stop stop the damage and kind of stop the flow of your own conversation, and just maybe adopt more of a reflective attitude and be quiet for a few minutes. It's okay to not have to keep a conversation going. It's okay to have a pause in there, and just to help your own emotions kind of settle down, and maybe to allow some space for that other person's emotions to settle down. You know, they may still keep going on while if you've recognized it and kind of drawn back and stepped back a bit, they may still be going on. But if you can allow that space for that energy to dissipate and just kind of ramp down a little bit in the space of silence, then at that point, if you're able to calm yourself down just enough through that spacious silence, and still attending, you can still attend to somebody and be present without saying anything, just by, you know, kind of, you know, having a reflective expression on your face. Let them, you know, you're still facing them. You're not turning away with your hand on the doorknob, but just to be silent and allow that silence to speak for itself. And then the energy settles down. And then if it feels like it's best to stop and disengage, then to say that, to say, you know, hey, you know, I feel like my mind is going in a place where I don't want it to go. I'm not sure that I can be as skillful as I'd like to be here. So I'd like to pause this, maybe take a time out, and go our separate ways for a little while. And I think it would be good to revisit this at some other time, to maybe to offer that assurance to somebody that you're not just shutting them out and that you're discontinuing the whole thing forever, but just to say, I need a time out in a very, you know, gentle way, so that I can be more skillful when we engage again. And let's plan to get together again. And, you know, maybe later in the day, we'll talk about when that should be. Does that sound okay to you? And ask their permission for that. That'd be how I would try it. Anyway, Paul, any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, well, I think the main thing is that to actually own it in terms of like me. Yes, there might be a futile argument going on, but I think it's important in terms of communication to sort of say, right now, I don't feel that I can. Right. I don't feel that I can contribute skillfully to this, and so it's like owning it, so that it's not, you know, on top of the futile argument. You don't sort of put it on to that other person. So,
right.
You know, if you weren't such an idiot, this would
right. I can see that you're very angry, so we better stop this.
Yeah, that's
that kind of passive aggressive.
Yes, that passive aggressive. Get another dig in.
Right.
Yeah, that's really not skillful.
It must be difficult for you to feel so bad the way you are. Yeah. That's not the way to do it.
That's not the way to do it. Yeah.
It's a good way. Okay. I think I'll skip over the next one because it's a little bit of a different topic, and maybe come back to it. We will get back to the Abhidhamma question, because I think the next one right after that is a little bit more in flow with this particular flow of conversation here, but I'll come back. How to deal with a family member who uses foul and abusive language upon being angry with other family members. Well, it's kind of the same approach as you all the things that I was talking about in my reflection of, if you are dealing with them, if you do need to deal with them and help open up a more skillful way try to open up a skillful way of communication, then, picking the time, the right time and place, staying with the facts, making sure that you're reasonably calm yourself before engaging, and asking their permission, just asking their permission. And if it's not, if it's so difficult and this particular person just isn't in the right space or will never be in the right space, and you think it is going to be futile, then you may not have really any choice other than to just say, hey, things aren't going well here. I don't feel confident that I want to be part of this. And you just have to find the way to set some boundary in your interactions with them. And you can't save the world if somebody is really, uninterested and unwilling to participate. You have to realize, the extent of your abilities. If someone's not there and wanting to learn or to hear you, then it's better to just, quietly, peacefully withdraw and just not participate. You don't have to participate in an angry discussion to try and make it all right. Some things you have control over, some things you don't have control over. So if you've given them all you've got, you've used up all of your skills, and it's not working, then it's back to that, hey, well, just have to withdraw, find a safe space, and, kind of reflect, not in a harsh way, but in an understanding way that, this is their karma that they're creating, and you can have compassion for that and sensitivity for that. And then if the door does open in some other way, there's a space for you to move in, then you can try again. But if it's not there, it's not there. And so you have to kind of use your judgment as to whether it's going to be effective or not, and not to beat yourself up if it's not possible. That's the hard facts, really. And then to be supportive with other family members, not in a, hopefully not in a gossipy way, but to give them give them space to express their concerns about this other person, but not in a way that's ganging up, if that's possible. Any thoughts?
No, that's good.
Okay, great. Okay, well, maybe go back to that other question that's kind of moving into other realms. How wrong is it to think Abhidhamma is pretty good stuff? It's not wrong at all. If studying and practicing and reflecting on Abhidhamma is something that brings up wholesome states of mind and helps explain things for somebody in a way that results in a better understanding of the Dhamma practice, and that it can skillfully be put to use in not just as an intellectual or theoretical kind of way, but that it can actually be brought in and incorporated into one's understanding truly at the level of the heart, then it's pretty good stuff. And I think, any reflections that you may hear from us about not being an Abhidhamma school or not being particularly interested in it are just more from a particular experience that some of us, and I include myself in this, have had, that going too far into the detailed analysis intellectually before having a firm grounding in just the actual experiential practice can be a bit, for me, and I am totally just speaking for myself, it can be a bit distracting, in that you can get a certain amount of charge. I can get a certain amount of charge out of thinking about something and resolving something and understanding the logic behind something on a conceptual basis, that kind of acts as a substitute for actually looking at suffering in my own experience, in this moment experience now, and realizing how that arises and how that ceases. It's easy to get caught up in the conceptual aspect of some of these things, speaking just for myself. But again, if yourself finds it actually a useful tool for reflection that actually brings the practice inwards to the level of experience, then that's what it's there for. That's why it is, part of the Tripitaka. Actually, it was included in that because it can be something that can be very useful if and when it's applied in the right way.
Excuse me. Yes, I think that's particularly skillful way of putting it, and recognizing that one wants to return to the experiential, and if the Abhidhamma is a helpful tool for drawing attention back to the experiential realm, then it's really useful. And one of the things that comes to mind is trying to find good direction with the Abhidhamma. Nyanaponika has a particularly good book on Abhidhamma that is very useful, and then also Bhikkhu Bodhi's done a series of teachings at City of 10,000 Buddhas, Dharma Realm. Right. I think it was for the university, Dharma Realm Buddhist University.
DRBU. Yeah.
DRBU. And those are, because both of them tend to, they're both incredibly knowledgeable and know the ins and outs of the Abhidhamma, but they're also, they're not distracted by the details. So then it's a helpful helpful guides into the Abhidhamma. And there can be helpful guides and unhelpful guides, in the same way that for meditation, I mean, there's some helpful teachings and unhelpful teachings.
Okay. Due to childhood traumas, I tend to be self-destructive in a number of ways. How can the Dhamma Buddhism help me to overcome that? Well, the first thing that jumps to mind for me is to, the Buddha Dhamma is so much grounded in non-harming as its basis and as its goal, as its objective. It's, harmfulness being the basis of a lot of dukkha, unhappiness, whether it's in the way we act towards other people, or which is why we have precepts for body and speech to prevent that harmful kinds of expression, but also in the mind. A lot of harmfulness can happen just in our thinking patterns. And a lot of Buddha Dhamma is really oriented towards not only skillfulness, but also kindness and tenderness and compassion, very soft, boundless, open, strong qualities of mind. And, I think it's useful to recognize that a lot of times, when we have, say, as you term it, self-destructive, or we say self-critical or self-judgmental qualities due to whatever reason that they're there, and sometimes it's could be pointed to as trauma in this lifetime. Perhaps it could be just conditioning over many lifetimes. To do that, to realize that, and to reflect on the fact that you are no different than anybody else, in that if you are saying things or experiencing things that are self-destructive, then that's also harmful in a way, and that we often talk to ourselves and think about ourselves in ways that we wouldn't want to think or talk about other people. So to offer yourself that kind of same kindness that you wish for others, and to that same sensitivity in a way that, if somebody came to you with a problem or a concern or some sort of habit pattern that was painful or difficult, um, most likely, as a sensitive person who's investigating these things, your response to them would be one of like, "Oh, that's very painful." That's, you'd have some empathy, you'd have some space, you'd encourage them in some way, and you should do the same thing to yourself. You should be just as compassionate and kind to yourself, because you are worthy of it just as much as anybody else is worthy of it. And for whatever reason, we people, and I find myself self-critical at sometimes too. It's like we somehow have adopted this notion that it's okay to be critical to ourselves, but not so to other people. But to realize that we're all the same, and it's kind of reflecting on that aspect of not self, of taking oneself in relation to others. That it's not that I'm experiencing these difficult things all by myself. This is the human condition. We all do it. And just as you would have sympathy and kindness for somebody else, you can have that for yourself too. And to give up that kind of self-judgment, it's a real chore, because it's can be ingrained in some of our conditioning. But just to realize that the Buddha Dhamma is meant for everybody, and how we hold and how we treat afflictive mind states, and wish others to be free from them, we have to really wish ourselves the same thing, and to be very genuine about that, because we're just as worthy as anybody else for goodness and well-being in our lives, and to give space around that again. Paul, any to consider on that?
No, that's good.
Okay, great. Okay. Question: can mental factors work simultaneously? Can sati and sampajanya work simultaneously? Well, it's kind of a little bit of a tricky question in terms of, mental factors, and that, and I'm again not so schooled well in Abhidhamma, but in exactly, one mind moment to the next, and maybe there is some discreteness in one mind moment, so that various mental factors aren't actually necessarily, or various particularly moments of perception or consciousness in a particular sense realm, sensory sphere, are actually that they, in terms of typical description of the mind, that it's actually a sequence of things, rather discrete moments. But in actuality, in terms of our own personal experience, most of these things flow together in what is apparent, at least it's perceived as a simultaneous kind of a thing, so that you have in any one kind of sphere or experience, you want to call it an experience, mindfulness and clear comprehension can be part of this mind state in which we're processing information, so that you can have that ability to recollect, focus, bring your attention to a specific thing with sati, and with clear awareness at the same time. So they work together, simultaneously. That word I'm not quite so sure about, but certainly they work together and in tandem with each other, so that the experience is one where there is both mindfulness and clear comprehension operating together to be able to understand and view a particular experience with clarity and with wisdom. So they're working together, at least. Further.
Well, I mean, the classic phrase from the sutta is not about sati and sampajanya particularly, but just in terms of experience of the khandhas. They are conjoined. They are not disjoined.
Right.
And that's really important, because you can, trying to, get down to the minute analysis of how things are separate, but that isn't how you experience them, and it isn't how you use them. So that recognizing, and in particular, sati and sampajanya are really conjoined. They work together simultaneously. And the Buddha very rarely speaks of sati on its own or sampajanya on its own. They're almost invariably spoken about together. And in the same way that many mental factors are working together. That's actually the skill of a practitioner and a meditator. Is how do you get this mind to work together with itself rather than at odds with itself?
Right.
So that's so. Yeah, just recognizing that there is a these mental factors of various different aspects. Let me just say off the top of my head, of like the spiritual faculties. Saddha, Virya, Sati, Samadhi, Panya. Those are faith, effort, mindfulness, concentration, wisdom. These are things that have to work together, and that is what creates a sense of spiritual oomph in order to see clearly and to relinquish and to penetrate the Dhamma. Have to, these factors have to learn how to work together.
Yeah. So the point being that the goal isn't to try and see each distinctive mind moment in themselves, but to understand how they all relate. Like as you were talking about the conjoined, like the classic contact, feeling, and perception.
Yes.
We talk about them as separate things, but in a sense, they're all qualities of the same experience. Just it's like an experience, but looking at it from a different angle, or a different part of the experience. But that they all work simultaneously.
It's kind of like it's like how you experience light in a certain way. When it shines through a prism, then it separates the light out into different colors. But for some anyway.
those of you who aren't colorblind.
but it does it. Okay, you can separate, but but it's all, and that's an aspect of the experience. But what's probably more important, what are you trying to shine the light on?
Right.
And that's, what are you trying to see?
Right.
And of course, from a Buddhist perspective, you're trying to see, how do I free the heart from dukkha?
Right. always bringing it back to that fundamental.
Yeah.
What's the purpose of all of this?
Yeah.
Well, there's a few more questions, and it's 7:45, and maybe I'll just do this one last one that's the next on the list as a quickie. Why Buddhism over, say, Hinduism or any other spiritual tradition? Or does this question matter? Well, it's a good question, I think. And you just you have to choose a spiritual path that is speaking to you, and what answers the call of your heart, and in a way that does that, that helps bring up skillful qualities and helps decrease unskillful qualities. So for sure, I think that the mistake that sometimes is made, is people assuming, kind of in this wishing for there to be harmony and agreement between everybody. Sometimes this, assumption or hope is made that, hey, it's all going to end up at the same place anyway, so that, whether it's Hinduism or Christianity or Buddhism or, Islam or whatever the religion is that, hey, we're all going to the same place. So, different path, but same mountaintop. And I guess my feeling is that maybe that I don't feel that quite applies. I think that different paths have different destinations. So you have to be clear about what destination it is that you're wanting, and where you want to go with it. So to be clear with whatever tradition you use about where it describes the path as going to, what the view is, what in Buddhism would be called right view, what the purpose of the path is, and to have that with some sort of clarity. And then you make your choices to the path. So these are all paths that end up in a certain place, presumably, if taken to their extent. But just to, Ajahn Pasanno's one of his favorite quotations from Yogi Berra, and his book, his and Ajahn Amro's book, The Island, is if you don't know where you're going, you might end up somewhere else. Yeah. So,
right.
Yeah. Any last thoughts about this before we sign off, Lingpa? Any thoughts to add to that? Or?
Well, I think that's the thing is you looking at, well, of course, here we are as Buddhist monks, so we're completely biased. This is, but certainly my own draw, is to the vision of the Buddha, in terms of what he sees as the goal, and the tools. That's one of the beautiful things I find about the Buddha's teachings, is he lays it all out, and here's your tools, there's the goal, go for it, it's up to you, and that's that gives me a lot of confidence, and has a I feel attracted to the perspectives that the Buddhist teachings give, and other people might not, and that's fine. and I think also one of the things is, when we say, why Buddhism? Well, did the Buddha even teach Buddhism? I don't think so. All he taught was here is his understanding of truths, spiritual truths, and trying to address the human condition, which I think is incredibly skillful. That as a human being, what do we most not want to experience. And that's dukkha, suffering, dissatisfaction, discontent, dis-ease. You know, nobody wants to nobody wants to experience that. And that's exactly what the Buddha addresses. How do we understand these aspects of our unsatisfactory feeling within the human condition, and how do we free our hearts from that? So that's in terms of why Buddhism. To me, that's the most
The
important
crux of the
thing. That's the
matter.
crux of the matter.
Yeah, totally. For myself too, it's, you know, a very clearly articulated process, as Paul was just saying, you know, of defining the problem and offering a solution that is very clear, very practical, and doable, and for realizing the end of the experience of suffering in the here and now, and also on a very transcendent level,
Yeah.
you know, on a very broad, you know, long-term, over the cosmos and many lifetimes and of suffering, how to see an end to that.
Yeah.
So, and nowhere have I found in any other traditions is the problem so clearly stated and the path so clearly articulated.
Yeah. That's my,
Thank you.
okay.
Okay, that's it for today, and we'll see you next time.